Tonight on Talking Points, a ceasefire reached in Syria. The Turkish leader agrees to keep the violence at bay, but will that deal last? Our Anthony Dabbundo is live in studio.
And the impeachment inquiry moves forward in Washington today after weeks of testimonies. House Democrats could have a major vote later this week.
And U.S.-China trade talks ramping up again. Did we see progress this week? Our panel joins us tonight with what you need to know. Talking Points starts right now. We begin tonight with breaking news. In a letter to House Democrats, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced today that there will be a vote on the impeachment inquiry this Thursday. Good evening. I'm Jack Watson.
And I'm Sabrina Maggiore. Representative Jim McGovern will introduce the legislation tomorrow to the House Rules Committee for consideration. According to the New York Times, it will be the first time that the House will go on record since the impeachment inquiry began about a month ago.
It follows a testimony from Ambassador to Ukraine Bill Taylor. In his testimony on Tuesday, Taylor claimed that U.S. military aid to Ukraine was dependent on the country opening a corruption investigation into the Bidens. Talking Points analyst Haley Vaughan here to break it down, how it will impact the impeachment probe. Haley.
Guys, it's important to note that this is not a vote on if the House will impeach President Trump, but instead a vote that Democrats say will, quote, affirm the inquiry. This is a reversal by House Democrats after they repeatedly insisted that there was no need for a formal vote. Let's take a look at the past week leading up to this decision. As you mentioned, this follows Bill Taylor's testimony on Tuesday in which he detailed an explicit quid pro quo. On Wednesday, around 24 Republicans stormed into a closed-door deposition, delaying the testimony of Laura Cooper, the Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary, for 5 hours. But on Friday, Democrats scored a major victory when a federal judge not only ordered the release of all redacted information from the Mueller investigation, but also declared the impeachment inquiry totally legal. And also today, Charles Kupperman, the former Deputy National Security Advisor, was scheduled to testify but failed to show. According to the Times, Kupperman filed a lawsuit last week demanding for a court to decide if he must testify after the White House ordered him not to cooperate. Kupperman is said to have been listening in on the phone call between Zelensky and Trump, making him a key part of the inquiry. House investigators have threatened to hold Kupperman in contempt for failure to comply. So as Washington enters into another week of deposition, there seems to be one burning question. In Taylor's testimony, and potentially in Kupperman's, have Democrats found their smoking gun?
Now, Haley, that is the question of the day, but let's move on to today's news. What do you think caused Democrats to actually go forward with this vote?
So as we saw, this is a reversal for Democrats, and it really seems to be a strategy to stop the Trump administration from halting testimony and withholding documents, because the Department of Justice has filed an appeal about the releasing the redacted info.
And given some of the more explosive testimonies that we saw last week, do you think that we're going to see a change in Trump's legal defense moving forward?
Yes, I do. I think we're going to have to see them pivot. There's been yet another testimony that has gone completely against what the Trump administration has been saying, that there is no quid pro quo. And I think they're going to have to be forced with confront that, yes, there was a quid pro quo. Yes, it was inappropriate. But no, it does not rise to the high crimes and misdemeanors, and it's therefore not impeachable.
Now, Haley, also out today, Charles Kupperman, he did refuse to testify. What do you think that means?
I think it means, as Adam Schiff says, that he thinks this could be proof that he could corroborate the other witnesses' testimony.
All right, Haley, thank you so much. We'll leave it there. And fighting between the Kurds and Turkish forces in Syria appear to have come to an end. At least for now, President Trump chose to lift all sanctions on Turkey in return for making the ceasefire between the two groups permanent. Trump insisted he'd bring the sanctions back if the ceasefire is broken. The president also says he's pulling all U.S. troops out of the region. Here to break down the aggression and its impact on diplomatic relations is Talking Points analyst Anthony Dabbundo. So Anthony, welcome. Members of Trump administration staunchly oppose the withdrawal of troops from Syria. What do you think caused Trump to actually go ahead and pursue that route?
He kind of took the unconventional Republican route of going more isolationist than Republican presidents and Republican leadership has been in the past, and saying that we're not the world's policemen. We're getting out of this mess. It's not worth the American lives that are being lost. So he's making that decision, but it hasn't been particularly well received by NATO and by French President Emmanuel Macron. Macron was highly critical of him last week when he said that it showed that NATO was weak and not willing to respond and defend its allies.
Anthony, let's look to the future here. What do you think are some of the implications of this massive decision?
Well, Turkey is ultimately getting what they want in being able to keep part of the territory in northern Syria that they're able to kind of get a stranglehold on. And it's now a few times in the last few years where aggression from first it was Putin, in Crimea. Now we have Erdogan here in northern Syria, where they've been able to kind of impose their will without any serious repercussions. And I think that could be seen as alarming for some Western leaders who are worried that, yes, Erdogan is saying for now he will hold the ceasefire and there won't be violence, but what happens next? What happens if he wants more? Who's going to defend the Kurds?
Right, and obviously this is a really complex situation, but do you see any clear winners coming out of this?
It has to be both Syria and Turkey here. Erdogan getting obviously the land that he wanted and getting the control in the region. And then of course Syria now, Assad getting to sit down with Putin and figure out how they're going to divide up the rest of the region. And the clear loser here is the Kurds, not only in the number that they lost in fighting ISIS for the United States, but in the fact that they now don't have exactly clear boundaries again, which they've been fighting for so long.
All right, Anthony, thank you very much. And third quarter earning results began to come in last week, and the U.S. economy is projected to see growth at above 2%. Those numbers are consistent with last quarter without much movement. Financial markets have shown more volatility in recent months, with President Trump's tariffs and changing interest rates leaving investors feeling uncertain. Growth slowing from 2018's 4% pace matches the economic mood worldwide, with China and much of Europe seeing slightly slowed growth. Talking Points analyst Michael Fernari is here to break down the recent economic reports.
Thanks, guys. In Q3, the U.S. economy looks to maintain 2% GDP growth. Now, the skyrocketing period from 2016 to 2018 seems to have slowed to steady growth between 2 and 3% for most of this year. Now, where we've seen some doubt recently is in the investment market. Uncertainty between the U.S. and China and the Brexit quagmire could be contributing to this uncertain period after a booming stock market from 2016 to 2018. Now, another thing that had been uncertain this year were interest rates. Some economists predicted that the Federal Reserve would raise interest rates in an effort to stabilize growth and insulate from possible recession. However, the Fed and central banks worldwide have largely kept rates low, as we can see here, coming to a low of 1.85% this October. There's still some room to grow, and central banks right now are not concerned about a recession. Now, the question left is, where does this leave us for Q4 and for the future? The Fed is committed to not raise interest rates for roughly the next year. Look for steady growth going forward, with the Bureau of Labor expecting growth in 88% of occupations. And it appears the U.S. economy is now settling into a steadier economic period. The Bureau of Labor also predicted a full recovery from the 2008 recession and full employment by 2020. Jack and Sabrina, back to you.
All right, thanks, Michael. And if you're voting in Syracuse this year, you may notice a box on the back of your ballot with a proposed amendment for the city charter. Talking Points guest contributor Jishnu Nair is here to tell us about Proposition 1.
On November 5th, people across Syracuse and Onondaga County will cast their votes for candidates for positions ranging from the city school board to the county executive. But one of the key candidates in this election is not a person, it's a proposition. Proposition 1 would alter the way Syracuse's districts are redrawn. The lines have not been redrawn in 20 years, and they're normally mapped out by city lawmakers using U.S. Census data. However, Proposition 1 would create an independent commission established by the Common Council to redraw Syracuse's districts. Syracuse's charter says that districts cannot have less than 15% or more than 25% of the population, and that any offending districts must be redrawn. The Common Council has already approved the amendment to the charter, but it needs a majority of the voters to pass. Common Council President Helen Hudson, who supports the amendment, says that it's time to take politics out of the process. According to Onondaga County's Board of Elections ballot, the vote for the proposition will be on the back of the ballot, so voters should take care to flip it over to decide who draws their districts. Back to you guys.
All right, Jishnu, thank you. Up next, our Connor White sitting down with a former member of the Northern Irish Police Service to discuss the relationship between Brexit and terrorism in Northern Ireland. Stay tuned.
What are you, superheroes?
Just four brothers who hate bullies and love this city.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it?
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got? Or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it?
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got? Or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
After yet another Brexit election, the UK will hold a general election later this year in an attempt to break the parliamentary deadlock that has killed 2 Brexit deals. The more controversial measures in each deal was the creation of a customs border in the Irish Sea, avoiding a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The last time a customs border existed between the two countries was during a period known as the Troubles. The sectarian divide sparked 30 years of violence and terrorism that left about 3,600 people dead. I sat down with Ken Pennington, who served in the Northern Irish Police Force during the Troubles and now works as an independent consultant on counterterrorism. I asked him whether or not a hard border in Ireland could re-spark violence.
These groups will not rely on Brexit to engage in violence, okay? But they will use it. And the difference between terrorism and organised crime is terrorism needs a story, a justification for its use of violence. And it uses that to recruit. So Brexit provides that story. I mean, the border now is over 300 miles long with 280 crossing points. And when I say crossing points, I mean the ones we know of, quite apart from the places where you can cross. It's ungovernable. And they will seek to use that area to, especially if Brexit comes in and you have different taxes on each side, they will use that for smuggling to raise revenue, which is an important point or part of running a terrorist campaign. Then when they've got that, the police services on both sides will have to try and control that. When they attempt, they'll be attacked, which means you could move to hard infrastructure like we had during the height of the so-called Troubles. And they will also be attacked. Now, I've heard the suggestion that there are technical solutions to this. Well, I was in charge of the entire border at one time, and I've never seen a technical solution. And even if there was one, what's to stop it being attacked? So a hard border will be used as a narrative by terrorist groups and as a justification for violence that they would have engaged in anyway.
So given the inherent negatives that you've laid out and the fact that you can't see a feasible way to actually set up any sort of hard border between the North and the Republic, why are certain political groups, including prominent ones in Northern Ireland like the DUP, supportive of that kind of idea?
Because the alternative is a border in the Irish Sea, with Northern Ireland remaining within the UK Customs Union, but also in the EU. So therefore you don't need any regulatory checks. But that will be seen by some in the unionist and loyalist community as a dilution of their Britishness.
There are provisions for the idea of there being a referendum in Ireland to reunite the North and the Republic. Is there any sort of feasibility to that idea?
There is. Now, that'll have to be conducted both in the North and in the South. So the whole population of both identities then have to make a decision that they'll accept that. The issue is demographics. Now, back in 2012, when there was a review of the police process, a thing called the Nolan Report, at that time, the population in Northern Ireland over the age of 30 was a majority unionist population. But below the age of 30, it's majority nationalist. So the demographics are changing. And equally, when there was an economic, this is an economic argument, there were some people who would maybe aspire to be nationalists but saw the economic benefit of being in the United Kingdom. If Brexit is as damaging as people are pointing out in several reports, then you could see people recalculating that economic advantage. So you could see, certainly within a decade, a border poll, as we've said, and if it gets a majority, then you have a united Ireland.
All right, and Connor also spoke with Pennington about what terrorism looks like today in Northern Ireland and how identity politics has impacted Brexit proceedings. You can watch that full interview on our website, CitrusTV.com. Moving to Latin America now, where there is unrest today. In recent weeks, there has been a string of protests in response to economic turmoil and government corruption there. Chile and Bolivia in particular have experienced violent clashes between police and protesters. Talking Points analyst Peyton May joins us now and says many are calling this a social revolution.
Around South America, people are protesting inequalities stemming from politicians. In Chile, at least 18 people have died in the uprising after subway fares increased. UN investigators are coming into the country this week to look at human rights issues dealing with how law enforcement handles protesters. Santiago's police are using tear gas to stop protesters that attacked factories, set subways on fire, and cleared out supermarkets. The President Sebastián Piñera declared Chile in a state of emergency and apologized with announcing government reforms. Now in Bolivia, protests started after President Evo Morales claimed to win a fourth term in the first round of voting. Morales has served as president for almost 14 years. Now election monitors say that there were many irregularities with voting, and Bolivians are protesting for a runoff. One of the men leading the protests is former President Carlos Mesa, the other presidential contender. His issue is that the branch who counted the votes is controlled by Morales' party. Mesa is hoping to take Morales out of power and take over the presidential role, a role he had to give up after protests in 2005. These protests are also taking place in many other countries in Latin America, revolving around long-term economic stagnation and corruption from political elites.
Now, Peyton, is there an end in sight here? When do you see an end to these protests?
Well, it doesn't seem like there's going to be an end anytime soon. The president of Chile said that he would reshuffle his cabinet, but that hasn't happened yet, and it doesn't seem like protesters will be appeased by that. Now, Bolivia and Chile are protesting to have their leaders step out of power. So I don't think they'll stop until that happened. Along with that, there's a lot of traction for other Latin American countries that are protesting as well. So this issue is really building.
All right, our Peyton May reporting there. Peyton, thank you. Chinese and American officials have cleared a major first step in ending the trade war. As the first part of a new trade deal, the two sides have agreed to keep tariffs at current levels, easing fears of an economic slowdown. Joining us now to discuss what's at stake in these talks are Talking Points analysts Rob Flax and Spencer Queskin. Now, gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us today. How are these trade negotiations progressing? Are they progressing at all?
Yeah, so CNBC has reported that Trump and China are actually really close to finalizing phase one of the trade deal. So phase one would include IP violations, financial services, and China purchasing between $40 and $50 billion worth of U.S. agricultural products. Now, in order to facilitate movement with the trade deal, the Trump administration has delayed a $250 billion tariff. Now, while China hasn't responded to the Trump administration's remarks and comments yet, over the weekend, the soybean market, the energy market, the metals market, and the index futures markets were all up, suggesting that investors believe that the trade deal is going to go through.
So it looks like there's potential progress there, but Rob, what do you think could be roadblocks to that progress?
Absolutely. One of the biggest roadblocks is the aforementioned IP rights violations. Now, CNBC is projecting that between $300 and $500 billion is lost due to Chinese firms taking American intellectual property and pirating it for their own uses. Now, the Trump administration, according to CNBC, is considering blacklisting any firms that are going to do this. But that is absolutely the biggest loss of revenue and the biggest black mark. Additionally, the Hong Kong protests are just shining a big international spotlight on China. Pence is calling out companies that are still doing business with them. So that is also putting a little bit of extra pressure, a little bit of extra heat on this argument. And so we think that people who are going to be looking at this have to consider both the PR problems of China, but also the great benefits of getting this trade deal and getting those markets, as aforementioned, back to where they should be.
Well, Rob, it'll certainly be interesting to see what gets left in, what gets left out of a potential U.S.-China trade deal. Rob, Spencer, thank you, gentlemen, very much. Coming up next, while the president deals with political turmoil back home, it's a major foreign policy win for his administration. We'll break down the death of the leader of ISIS when we return.
Did you hear about the pony with a sore throat? He was a little horse. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why couldn't the Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Where do cats go on vacation? New York.
Extremist ISIS leader is dead after U.S. forces raided his compound in northern Syria late Saturday night. One of the most wanted terrorists in the world, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, detonated a suicide vest while trying to escape.
In a statement issued on Sunday, New York Congressman Anthony Brindisi applauded the death of Baghdadi as, quote, a great victory in the war on terror. Representative John Katko also hailed Baghdadi's elimination as a victory, but warned that the fight against ISIS is far from over and that the U.S. must remain vigilant.
U.S. officials say the operation would not have been possible without the collaboration between U.S. troops and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces in Syria. And let's talk a little about that, Sabrina. The SDF, of course, the U.S. pulling troops out of that region. This, a major policy win for the president after what was a tumultuous past couple of weeks.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely something that he's able to tout, especially given all the confusion that we saw in Syria and Turkey in the past week. So definitely something that now he can sort of say that he's doing something positive for foreign policy. And according to a monthly report by the German central bank, Germany's economic output decreased slightly in the third quarter. This will mark the second consecutive quarter of shrinking, indicating that the nation may be heading towards a recession, which most economists define as 2 straight quarters of economic contraction. The report points to a weakening export industry as the cause of the decline.
The German economy is relatively reliant on its exports, and in the midst of a U.S.-China trade war, increased protectionist policies implemented by the two economic powerhouses have taken a toll. Uncertainty in the UK due to Brexit has also weakened the demand for exports. German automotive manufacturing was one of the biggest sectors hit, with a 1.5% decline between the second and third quarters of this year.
While the official numbers won't be released until November 14th, leading economic institutes have called on Angela Merkel's government to slash their zero-debt policy in order to counter the economic slowdown. Thus far, Merkel and her conservative governments have resisted the calls to implement a stimulus package. And now, talking about that for a little bit, Merkel has really been hesitant to implement these proactive policies. Her big point here is that she was one of the first people to get Germany on a debt-free path.
And making these positive trade transactions is going to be tough moving forward, especially since Angela Merkel's, one of her main organizations here, the EU, has officially extended the Brexit deadline for the United Kingdom to leave the EU, paving the way for even more international uncertainty in Europe.
Right, and I think a big factors here is both Brexit and, as we said, the U.S.-China trade war. It's having a major impact. Protectionist policies are really affecting Germany, and German economy is one of the strongest in Europe, so that could have some significant implications for the rest of the European Union as well.
Agreed, Sabrina. Up next, we're looking ahead to next week in Onondaga County. Elections for over 50 offices are on November 5th. Stay tuned to hear which elections you should pay attention to.
Most party fouls are pretty dumb. But if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving. The ultimate party foul.
They call me Maxie, but I prefer tripod. I was your above-average four-legged homie, and then wham, bam, minivan. Some people pity me. Now that's lame. I still run, fetch, and swim. And the ladies love me. I'm the ultimate wingman. Just don't ask me to high five.
Fancy pants peanut butter? A big screen television? You haven't even bought a sofa yet. A motorcycle? When your father finds out, he's gonna flip his shoes with 2 buckles? What do you even need 2 buckles for? Mr. Big Shot, buying whiskey shots for everybody in the bar. From the looks of it, I'd say nobody even remembers. Feed the pig.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
Looking ahead, Onondaga County's general election is a little more than a week away on November 5th.
Over 50 positions are up for grabs across the governments of the city of Syracuse and Onondaga County. Joining us now to take a look at the major local elections is Talking Points analyst Augustus LaRue. Now, Augustus, thanks so much for joining us right now. There's a lot of names flying around this election. Anything we should really be lasered in on?
Well, of course, within the context of the historic Republican stronghold that is Onondaga County, in particular, we're going to want to pay attention to the positions of county executive and county comptroller. Both of them are currently being contested by major Democratic figures. In the lead for county executive being Tony Malavanda, challenging incumbent Ryan McMahon, and for county comptroller Martin Masterpole, who for a long time served as the chief auditor for Onondaga County. Has a very successful record behind him.
And obviously Malavanda and McMahon sort of exchanged a couple nasty back and forths this week. Can you talk to us a little bit about those races and what we're seeing there?
Indeed. Well, as I said before, it's a very high stakes race, which naturally did lead to a very large and bloody result when they went ahead against one another at this latest debate. Malavanda came out of the gate launching several attack ads against incumbent Ryan McMahon, accusing him of trying to recruit investors for a Ponzi scheme. Now, McMahon immediately went on record to refute those claims, accusing Malavanda of being a liar and seeking to promote political gain.
All right, Augustus, a lot at stake next week. Augustus, thanks so much for joining us. That's all the time we have for Talking Points tonight. For more episodes, webisodes, and articles, head to our website, CitrusTV.com.
And make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Tune in next week for another episode of Talking Points. For all of us here, I'm Sabrina Maggiore.
And I'm Jack Watson. Have a great evening, Syracuse.